Hello Year 3, for Science today we're going to continue on with friction. Last class we learned that friction is a force. It's a force that goes in the opposite direction of movement. We know that friction slows things down and makes them stop, and we also know that friction is greater on rough surfaces than on smooth surfaces. With friction being present anytime that two surfaces are touching, let's ask, how can friction be useful? Friction can be useful in our daily lives. Without friction, we would not be able to do a few things. For example, using a pencil, the surface of the pencil and the surface of our fingers causes friction, which means we're able to hold the pencil. The same with tying shoelaces. The surface of our fingers and the surface of the shoelaces causes friction, so we're able to hold the shoelaces tightly to be able to tie the shoes. Friction between the ground and the soles of our shoes helps our shoes grip the ground. This prevents us from slipping when we walk. So sometimes a loss of friction can be a problem, like in this situation, where the woman has slipped over on a smooth surface such as ice. This is because there is little friction between smooth surfaces of the soles of our shoes and of the ice. Why do you slip and fall when the floor has just been mopped? This is because liquid creates a barrier between the ground and your shoes and makes the friction a lot less. So we can increase or decrease the friction depending on our surface. It is because of less friction that you hear of many accidents during rain. Even though the friction of the brakes is still there, the brakes may be wet and the wheels do not have as much contact with the ground because of the water. Friction helps slow down or stop moving things. So that means friction between the brakes and the wheels of a moving car help the car to slow down and stop. The moving car slows down when the driver applies the brakes, and then the friction between the brakes and the wheel activates and slows down the car. So here, the friction is useful. Friction between moving surfaces produces heat. Now, can you remember when we rubbed our hands together really fast and they got hot? That means that they were warming up because of the friction between the two surfaces. And another example here is starting a fire with some friction using a piece of wood. So, to heat ourselves up and to start fires, this is when friction is useful. We also saw that friction can be a problem in our daily lives. What happens when we rub an eraser on a table? And what happens when we do this for a long time? The friction between the eraser and the surface of the table causes the eraser to wear off and become smaller. So over time, we start to lose our eraser. We can see this wear and tear on the bottoms of our shoes. If the soles of our shoes are worn out, they cannot grip the ground well, and so we end up slipping easily. So this wear and tear is definitely a big disadvantage of friction. So we were saying before, friction causes heat, and it can be an advantage when we want to heat something up, like ourselves, but friction can also produce heat that is not useful. The moving parts of machines can become too hot and they can damage the machine or wear it down. For example, the spinning grinder and the piece of metal. Friction between the piece of metal and the spinning grinder produces so much heat that little sparks are formed. So this is definitely a disadvantage situation. We know that because friction opposes motion, it slows things down. But what if we don't want it to be slowed down? For example, friction between the train wheel and the train tracks slows the train down. So that means to go fast, the train needs to use more energy or more petrol to overcome the friction. So this is definitely a disadvantage. But if the friction between the train wheels and the train tracks is reduced, trains will move faster. So let's see how we can reduce friction. So what can we do to reduce friction? We can reduce the unwanted effects of friction by adding lubricants to moving parts. Examples of lubricants are oils and waxes. Also we saw that we can also use a powder to reduce friction. Another way is to use rollers or wheels. So for example, in the two pictures, the man is applying oil to the bicycle chain to reduce friction to make pedaling smoother. This also will reduce the wear and tear and the heat that is produced. And the girl in rollerblades, it will reduce the friction and allow the rollers to go faster instead of just walking. We also know that we can add some wheels onto heavy things to help move them. In your workbook on page number 84, let's complete the table together. The question is, when is friction useful and when is it not useful? So let's look at the activity. The activity is walking. There is friction between the soles of your shoes and the ground. Now the question is friction useful when you're walking? Yes, it is. But why is it useful? It's because it helps us to walk without slipping. Next thing we want to do is glide smoothly and quickly on ice with skates. Now, is friction useful in this situation? No, it's not. But why? Because too much friction prevents us from skating smoothly or quickly. We do not want a lot of friction here because we want to go very fast and very smooth. Friction useful when we're holding a glass? Yes, it is. It helps us hold onto the glass. The friction between our fingers and the smooth side of the glass is very small, but it's still enough to help us grip it so it doesn't slip out of our hands. Otherwise, we'd never be able to drink if we couldn't hold a glass. So definitely useful. What about if we want to go down a slide quickly? Is friction useful here? Do we want to be slowed down? No, it is not useful. Too much friction prevents us from sliding down smoothly or quickly. Can you imagine going bump, bump, bump down the slide? You wouldn't go very fast if there was too much friction on a rough surface, right? Look at the last example, striking a match. Now, what are we trying to do here when we strike the match? We're trying to create a fire. And where do we know that fire comes from? We know that we can produce heat if we produce a lot of friction. So, when you're striking a match, is friction useful? Yes, it is. It's useful because it produces heat to light up the match when the two surfaces are rubbed against each other. This creates the spark. On your friction worksheet, I want you to tick the correct box. Is friction useful or a problem? Let's do the first one together. Gripping a pencil. Friction is definitely useful. Otherwise, without friction, we wouldn't be able to hold it and the pencil would slip out of our hands. Continue on with number 2 by yourselves. Number 2, moving a box across a floor. Is friction useful or a problem in this situation? Tying hair into a ponytail. Walking. And going down a snowy slope on a sled. Please tick the correct box. Friction is useful or friction is a problem in each of these situations. Let's have a quick review about what we learned about advantages and disadvantages of friction. Some advantages or useful ways of friction is we can slow down our bicycles and cars, we can grip things, we can create heat, and we can walk safely. Friction is not useful in situations such as going down a slide, bowling, ice skating, and skiing. Anytime we don't want to go slowly, anytime we want to go fast. We also know there are disadvantages, such as creating heat when we don't want it, which can damage machines. There are wear and tear on surfaces, such as on the bottom of our shoes and our tires, and it makes it harder to move heavy objects. We also know that we can decrease friction when we don't want to have a lot of it. We can add a lubricant, such as oil or wax. We could add specific powders to make surfaces smoother, and also we can add wheels to an object to make moving heavy objects easier. And now we're coming to the end of science for year 3. The whole year is finished. So let's go to Pupil's book, page 146. I want you to be answering all the questions in relation to what we learned about friction. Use technical vocabulary, such as friction, opposing motion, slowing down, grip, all of these types of words, please. So let's start with exercise 1. Look at this picture. Dina's hands are wet with soapy water. She finds it difficult to open the jar of jam. Please tell me why. B. Suggest one thing she can do to open the jar easily. What can she do to change the friction? And 2. Grace is using a force meter to pull a block across a carpet. She found that she needed 2 newtons of force to make the block start moving. So this is 2 newtons on a carpet. The block did not move when she pulled it with a force of less than 2 newtons. Why? This one is very, very tricky and hard. Let's see who can get this one. Why did it not move when she didn't apply enough force, less than 2 newtons? And B, she repeated her experiment on a smooth floor. Was the force needed to make the block start moving more or less than 2 newtons? Please explain your answer. Number 3, these ones look quite easy. Give 3 examples in real life of the following. The uses of friction, where is friction useful? And B, problems caused by friction, where is it a disadvantage or a problem? And 4, state 2 ways to reduce friction. What can we do to reduce it? Let's do our final review of friction. Friction is a force that affects any objects that are touching each other. The effect of friction is in the opposite movement of direction. Friction resists movement and slows things down. Friction increases on rough surfaces and decreases on smooth surfaces. Friction can be useful, but it may also have disadvantages. We can reduce friction by using lubricants, some powders, or adding wheels. Congratulations, Year 3! You have finished Year 3 Science. Well done, everyone. Time to jump up and do a happy dance. Happy dance, happy dance! Well done. I've loved teaching all of you guys, and I'm very happy that we've come to the end. But now it's time to get ready for the exams. But anyway, congratulations!